Today we're going to have an in-depth interview in the next segment with Russ Ramsland talking about the idea of election fraud. I want to differentiate that from vote fraud. Very quick stories just as a tease about what the idea of just vote fraud involves in our country. It's one question: who ends up on the voter rolls? Who's allowed to vote? That question, we have all sorts of debates in this country about whether ex-felons should get to vote, how frequently should clean the voter rolls, whether attempts to have voter ID is fair and reasonable, or on the other hand, does requiring voter ID somehow suppress voters? These are really important issues, and they all get up to the question of who is on the voter rolls before you get to the start of an election. Just a few recent rulings on that kind of subject. There was actually an amazing decision by a judge in North Carolina striking down a voter ID provision. This is in February of this year. A voter-approved voter ID law in that state struck down by a judge, basically saying that the people who were in the legislature that got that started themselves shouldn't have been elected due to their redistricting maps 2 years ago. We had the North Carolina governor recently in November, this month. North Carolina governor vetoed a bill. The caption in this article says controversial. I don't see it as controversial. A bill that would remove names from the voter rolls of people who have been determined by the courts in that state as not eligible to sit on a jury because they aren't citizens. But hey, can't take them off the voter rolls. You had a Kansas judge, a federal judge in Kansas, strike down a voter ID law that basically said you had to be, if you're registered to vote, you have to prove U.S. citizenship, which seems like it's very reasonable, but that was also struck down. These all have to do with getting people on the voter rolls. Next point about this is we try to investigate voter fraud. President Trump, you may remember when he came into office, started 2017, one of the things he did was create a voter fraud commission. Basically, let's look into and figure out, do we really have a vote fraud problem or not in this country? It was disbanded in January of 2018, I think it was, maybe January of this year, but disbanded because the members of the commission reported that various states in this country would not comply with requests for information from the commission, wouldn't tell them who's on their voter rolls, wouldn't give them authority to essentially compare, is the same person on the vote roll in 3 states, or is the same person, who is now residing in a cemetery registered to vote in 3 states. These kinds of clearing up the voter roll things, the states would not cooperate with the commission that President Trump set up. We also had a huge problem in California. It's often referred to as harvesting votes, but they had in California legislation in 2015 where they passed a series of bills, all allegedly intended to make it easier and easier for people to vote, to get on the voter rolls, and to actually succeed in voting. And so they had things like, they call it vote harvesting, where you could have people knocking on doors and saying, hey, I'm here to collect your vote, despite reports of people saying they were coerced by the people at the door, hassling them, come on, you got to vote, here's how you vote, give me your ballot. They had the ballots mailed to every voter in the state, a whole bunch of provisions in California, which many people attributed to the loss of numerous Republican seats in Congress because of the way California justice law, making it easier and easier. Supporters would say easier to vote. Critics would say easier to cheat. We'll have to find that out. Last point I want to hit on this before we turn to our interview today, and was that there was a bill, and I found this in Washington today. It's a great segue to our next segment. So in Washington, even though we have a Democrat majority in the U.S. House, and they're usually the ones opposed to voter ID and opposed to cleaning voter rolls, a House-backed bill in June of this year, the Democrats passed a bill essentially requiring voter-certified paper ballots in every state. Now, I got to tell you, I'm sure the bill was loaded with bad provisions that made Republicans vote against it, because the Democrats voted for paper ballots, often seen to be the remedy, and Republicans were against it. I'm going to guess the bill had a lot of junk in it, but I want to end the first 5 by reading a quote from a Republican member of Congress, Rodney Davis, Republican from Illinois, and explaining why he voted against the Democrats' bill requiring paper ballots. He is, by the way, this guy is the ranking Republican of the House Administration Committee. And he said, I want to highlight the fact that there's no evidence of voting machines being hacked in 2016, 2018, or ever. So why are we forcing states to get rid of what they deem to be safe technology? We should work together and safeguard the technology, not abandon it. This was his explanation for voting against paper ballots in the bill pending then in Congress. And that, my friends, is today's First Five.